You fix things before anyone asks you to. Doesn't matter what it is. A leak under the sink, a weird noise in the engine, a coworker's mistake that's about to hit the inbox of someone who won't be as forgiven. You just handle it. Quietly. Efficiently. Like there's some internal checklist running in the background that never shuts off. And if someone thanks you for it, you wave it off. Brush past it. Maybe crack a joke. Because to you, that's not something worth mentioning. That's just what you do. If you were born between 1965 and 1972, you're part of a very specific slice of Generation X. The older half. The ones who didn't just grow up in the 70s. You lived it. You remember it. The wood-paneled station wagons. The rotary phones that weighed more than your book bag. Saturday mornings that started with a bowl of cereal and ended when the streetlights buzzed on. You were the last kids in America whose parents didn't track them by GPS. You were tracked by the honor system. My name's Frank, and today we're talking about what makes the older Gen X man tick. Where those instincts came from, what you were taught, how it shaped your decisions, and what separates your experience from the guys born even 5 or 6 years after you. Because that gap is bigger than people think. Let's start with the house you grew up in. Not the layout, the rules. If you were born in the late 60s or early 70s, your parents were most likely boomers or late silent generation. And the rules in that house weren't flexible. There was a right way and a wrong way. There was what you were supposed to do and what happened if you didn't. The explanations were short. Sometimes they didn't exist at all. You were told to respect adults. Not some adults, all of them. Teachers, neighbors, the guy at the gas station. You didn't talk back. You didn't make excuses. And if somebody corrected you, you took it. That was the deal. For boys specifically, there was another layer. You were taught, not always in words, but in everything you saw, that a man handles his business. He provides. He doesn't complain. He doesn't ask for help unless someone's bleeding. You watched your father, your uncles, the men on your block, and that's what they modeled. Show up. Do your job. Keep your problems to yourself. Nobody called it toxic back then. Nobody called it anything. It was just how it worked. And here's the thing. A lot of those lessons stuck. Not because you sat down at 40 and decided to adopt them. Because they were loaded into your operating system before you even had the vocabulary to question them. You still show up early. You still fix things without being asked. You still measure your worth by what you produce, not by how you feel about it. And on the surface, those seem like good traits. Reliable, dependable, useful. But there's a cost, and it takes about 3 decades to see it. Because what they never taught you is what to do when you're tired. Not physically tired. You know how to push through that. Emotionally tired. The kind of tired where you've been holding the wall up for so long that your arms don't shake anymore. They just went numb. A lot of older Gen X men hit their 50s and realize they've been running a program that doesn't have a rest function. You know how to work. You know how to show up. You know how to take a hit and keep going. What you don't always know is how to say, I need to sit down for a minute, because that was never in the script. I've been working on something on the side, a book called Psychology of Gen X. It covers a lot of the things I couldn't fit into a single video, like how your parents' generation wired you for certain habits, and what those habits look like now. It's in the description if you want to check it out. Now let's talk about nostalgia for a second, because when you were a kid, the world moved at a different speed. Literally. You didn't have the internet until you were already grown. You didn't have a cell phone in your pocket until you were well into your 20s, maybe your 30s. When you were a kid, if you wanted to know something, you went to the library, or you asked someone who might know, or you just didn't find out. The culture you absorbed was physical, records, cassettes, paperback books from the grocery store wire rack. You watched 3 channels, maybe 4 if the antenna was right, and you shared that experience with everyone on your block because there was nothing else to watch. That's why your nostalgia hits different than the younger Gen X crowd. The ones born in the late 70s and early 80s grew up in the MTV era. Cable was already normal by the time they were in middle school. The internet showed up while they were in college. Their cultural references are neon. Yours are wood grain. You remember the tail end of Vietnam on the evening news. You remember the gas lines. You remember when Star Wars showed up in theaters and changed the whole game. The younger half of Gen X caught those things on VHS, if they caught them at all. You were in the room. You remember Watergate, or at least the mood it left behind. You don't remember the specifics, maybe. You were little. But you remember the tone. The way adults talked about the government like it had let them down. That ambient distrust didn't come from a textbook. It came from the living room. And that matters more than people realize. Because by the time you were a teenager, you already carried this low-level understanding that the system wasn't necessarily looking out for you, that authority could be wrong, that the people in charge didn't always deserve the chair they were sitting in. That attitude shaped your work ethic. You didn't work hard because you believed in the company. You worked hard because you believed in yourself. You figured if things fell apart, and things do fall apart, you'd need to be the one still standing. According to Solston's psychological research from 2025, Gen X holds only about 20% of the U.S. adult population, but occupies roughly 31% of leadership positions across industries. And the trait that scores highest among Gen X men in that study isn't charisma or ambition. It's self-control. Gen X men score a 46 out of 100 on that metric, higher than almost every other generation. You learned to manage yourself before anyone gave you a title. That self-control shows up everywhere, in how you handle conflict, in how you spend money, in how you parent, which is probably the place where your upbringing and your adult choices collide the hardest, because a lot of older Gen X men are parenting the exact opposite of how they were raised, not because they hated their childhood, most of you don't, but because you noticed the gaps, the things nobody said, the conversations that never happened, the questions you had that nobody answered, not because they didn't care, but because their generation didn't think those conversations were necessary. So now you talk to your kids. You explain things. You try to make the invisible stuff visible. And sometimes it works. And sometimes your kids stare at you like you're reading from a manual they didn't ask for. Here's where it gets interesting, though, because the older Gen X man is sitting in a very specific seat right now. You're not young. You're not old. You're in the spot where everything lands on you at once. Pew Research found that more than half of adults in their 40s, 54%, have a living parent over 65 and at least one dependent child. For the oldest Gen X men, it's even more layered because some of you started families later. You had kids in your 30s or 40s. So now you've got a teenager or a college-age kid and an aging parent, and you're managing both while still working, still producing, still holding the wall. And 31% of people in that position say they always feel rushed. Not sometimes, always. But here's what nobody talks about. You don't complain about it. Because the wiring from your childhood, the handle your business programming, it's still running. You absorb the pressure. You adjust the schedule. You drive your kid to practice, then drive across town to check on your dad, then sit in traffic wondering when the last time you did something just for yourself was. And if someone asks how you're doing, you say fine. That word does a lot of heavy lifting in your vocabulary. Let's talk about what separates you from the younger Gen X, because it's more than just birth year. The guys born in the mid to late 70s came up in a different cultural window. They had cable television from the start. They had video games by elementary school. The internet hit while they were still teenagers. Their relationship with technology is a little more native, not like millennials. They still remember life before screens, but they didn't have to cross the same bridge you did. You went from rotary phones to smartphones, from handwritten directions to GPS, from a card catalog in the library to a search engine in your pocket. And you adapted, quickly. But you adapted the way someone learns a second language, fluently, but always aware it's not your first one. That shows up in how you use technology now. You don't merge your identity with it. You don't post every thought. You don't need likes to validate a decision. You use the tools, but you don't worship them. And there's a confidence in that, a quiet one. The younger Gen X guys are a little more plugged in. They're more likely to have a social media presence, more likely to share publicly. Not dramatically different. They're still Gen X, but the gap is there. They grew up with more options, more channels, more noise. Your childhood had fewer inputs, and that made the ones you had hit harder. When you hear a song from 1978, it doesn't just bring back a memory. It brings back a temperature, a smell, the exact weight of that afternoon. Because you weren't splitting your attention across 6 screens. You were in the moment. Your brain recorded it in high resolution because there was nothing competing with it. That's why your nostalgia is so specific. It's not a list of pop culture references. It's sensory. It lives in your body. And when it surfaces, it takes you all the way back. Not to a decade, to a room. I wrote something I've been meaning to write for a while, a short book called Psychology of Gen X. It traces the things you do today back to the rooms and the people that built those habits into you. If that sounds interesting, links in the description. Now, what have you learned? Because you have learned things, hard things, things your father's generation wouldn't have admitted out loud. And here's what separates the older Gen X man from the person he was 20 years ago. You've started to sort out what was a lesson and what was a limitation. The work ethic stayed. The resilience stayed. The ability to stay calm when everything around you is loud. Those are real. Those serve you. But the idea that asking for help is weakness, you've started to let that go. Maybe not all the way. Maybe not in front of everybody, but enough to know it's not true. The idea that your feelings don't matter as long as the bills are paid, that one cracked around 45 and split wide open by 50. You realized your emotional life wasn't a luxury. It was connected to everything else. Your health, your relationships, your ability to enjoy the thing you built. According to research from therapist.com, Gen X's emotional needs were deferred in childhood. Adults were the focus of families. Then, when Gen X became parents, the cultural focus shifted entirely to children. You got skipped twice. And a lot of you are only now circling back to ask yourselves the questions nobody asked you when you were young. Questions like, what do I actually want? Not, what am I supposed to want? Not, what looks right from the outside. What do I want? Call it a midlife correction, because it's not a crisis. It's the first honest inventory some of you have ever done, and it's overdue. You also learned something about friendship that took decades to name. When you were young, friendship was proximity. It was the kid on your street, the guys on your team, the people you worked with. You didn't have to try. It just happened. Now, it doesn't just happen. You have to make it happen. And that's harder than it sounds for a generation of men who were never taught how to maintain relationships outside of obligation. You know how to show up for a job. You know how to show up for your family. Showing up for a friend on a Tuesday night just because you want to talk, that's newer territory. But the guys who figure it out, they'll tell you it changed everything. Because the loneliest version of you isn't the one who's alone. It's the one who's surrounded by people and still carrying everything by himself. The older Gen X man isn't broken. He's not a relic. He's not some cautionary tale about outdated masculinity. He's a man who was handed a set of tools as a kid, used them to build a life, and is now standing back and asking which tools still work and which ones need to be retired. That takes more courage than people give you credit for, because tearing something down and starting over, that's dramatic, but it's easy to understand. Sorting through a lifetime of habits and quietly upgrading the ones that no longer serve you while keeping the ones that do. That's precision work. That's maturity. And that's exactly what the older Gen X man is doing right now. Whether anyone notices or not, you don't need the credit. You never did. But it's worth hearing that what you're doing is harder than it looks. And the fact that you're doing it quietly doesn't make it less real. You were built to last. And the best part, you're still building. Quick thing before I go. Psychology of Gen X came out of doing this channel and realizing there was a bigger story connecting all of these topics. If you want to take a look, it's linked below. See you in the next video.